Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show how I made this old rustic wooden coffin for less than $20. Alright, for this build right here, you're only going to need just a couple different items. One is going to be this piece of privacy fencing you see behind me right here. Obviously, this is going to be the key piece. Generally, what I'll do is I'll go on the marketplace and I'll find somebody that has some old fencing in their backyard. They just want to get it out of there. A lot of times you go pick this stuff up for free. And obviously, that's what you're going to want to do for this project is try to find some of this stuff for free. Some people might want a few bucks for it, but try to keep it $5 or less just because the bottom's already going to have some rot on it and stuff like that. And you're going to be wasting material. So try to keep it $5 or less unless it's a really good piece of material. The other thing you can do to also save money on this particular build is not having to do any painting, because generally these things are already weathered and look like crap to begin with. So not having to paint is going to save you a bunch of money right there as well. The other thing you also got to pick up is you go to Home Depot, Lowe's, any of those places, and pick some of these up right here. Now these are some drop pieces I have, but they're generally 8 foot long. They're a 1x2 pine furring strip. You can pick these up anywhere from $1.50 to about $2 a piece, depending on where you go. And then the other thing I generally do is go in the drywall, the screw section, and pick up myself some 2.5-inch drywall coarse thread screws. I like to go a little bit longer because I'd rather cut them off than have something that's going to be a little too short for my project, depending on what I'm working on. So I usually go about 2.5 inches and just cut them off. And these are about $6 for these boxes right here. So if you pick up a box of these for $6, you pick up 2 of these on the high side of $2 a piece. Now you're only about $10. By the time you got some tax, you might be around $11 by the time you're said and done. So if you pick this stuff up for about $11, you pick this right here up for free. Unless you plan on doing anything special like fabrics or anything like that, you should be able to build this project for less than $20. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so I'm going to start off by measuring the height of the skeleton and the width of the skeleton to find out exactly how many board slats it's going to take for the height and the overall width. And for this one, 3 boards is going to be good for my sides. 4 boards is going to be good for the top and bottom. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my skill saw. I'm going to cut the main stringers so I can separate these things into 3 and 4 foot sections. Now that the pieces are cut in sections, I laid the skeleton on here just to kind of get an idea of how much material I can cut off, because I got to cut off all those rotted sections that I'll talk about earlier in the video. The base is going to start off at 64 inches long, and I'm measuring the base here, and I'm going to make the feet area 10.5 inches, and the shoulders is going to be 16 inches because that's the widest point. Now that I got all my measurements done and I got all my lines on there, I'm going to go ahead and take the skill saw and start cutting everything out and generating the most classic shape that people recognize as a coffin. Now I'm going to lay the skeleton back on here and start measuring the top half, and I think I'm going to make the top the same as the bottom, 10.5. So I'll be 10.5 at the top, 10.5 at the bottom, and 16 at the widest point at the shoulders. Now what I'm doing here is I'm taking the bottom piece, I'm laying it on top of what's going to be the top piece and tracing it out. Now what I'm doing is I'm leaving an extra 1/2 inch all the way around the whole piece, just so I have extra material to work with later on. Alright, so this is the point that the 1x2s come into play. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be cutting those to fit in between the original stringers for the fencing, and this is going to allow me to have something to anchor my sides into. Now these don't have to be dead on perfect, they just got to fit in between them, so I'm just eyeballing them and cutting them, and then I'll flip it over and I'll screw them in from the top side. Now in the beginning of the video I mentioned I was going to be using all 2.5-inch screws, but for like this section right here, shorter screws are going to be better. And I have an extra box of 1.25-inch drywall screws, so that's what I'm going to use for this part right here. Now the measurements that I'm using for this is based off of those 5-foot skeletons. So if you're planning on building something a little bit bigger for somebody to actually be inside, obviously you're going to want to use a little bit more material. So instead of a 4-foot section for this top and bottom, it'll probably be a 5-foot section for your top and bottom, and you might have a 4-foot section for your sides. Alright, so it's time to start working on the sides. Now I do need to cut that rotted section off, but I'm going to try to keep as much material as I possibly can so I have enough to work with. Now I'm just going to eyeball this right here. So all it is, I just held it against the base and just made a mark where the point meets. I'm going to add these 1x2s on the bottom right here, so when I cut it, the boards will stay together for me, plus they'll give me something to anchor them to after the fact. Now right here I need to notch these boards so it sits down over top of it. I'll show you in just a second what I'm referring to. All right, I want to show you what that notch was for, just to kind of show a little more in depth with it. So you see, this is obviously my side piece that I originally cut right here. And this is the piece where I cut it and made that notch. What that does, that allows me to take this piece, run it all the way down to the table, and this sits on top of the area that the floor is going to be on. So when you saw me do a still picture of that notch, that's essentially what that notch was for right there. So it can sit on top here, and this also gives me something to screw my lumber to. Now that that notch is done, this is where I'll be taking the side pieces and screwing them right into that 1x2 that was screwed to the bottom of the floor, and that's what's going to start anchoring everything together. And if you notice, I'm eyeballing a lot of this stuff because inconsistency is going to make these things just look a little bit better. They don't have to be perfectly square and true in the whole 9 yards. Obviously, a little imperfection just makes them look a little bit better. So earlier in the video, when you saw me take the base and lay it on top of that other piece I was going to be using for my lid, I mentioned that I left an extra 1/2 inch of material all the way around that piece. And the reason for that is so when I get everything on top here, it'll actually sit on top of the coffin right here, so I have a nice reveal and nice look when it's all done. You also just noticed I was pulling the lid pieces off the stringers. I did that because I wanted to line the stringers up where I wanted them to be as tight as I can against the corner blocks that are holding everything together. Plus, I wanted to add an extra one in the center here so I have less chance of the boards wanting to buckle too much. And what it is, I just temporarily screwed them into the side of the coffin, which will come right out afterwards. And what this is going to allow me to do is going to allow me to take my pieces, lay them on top. I can set them where I want them, work on my gaps, get everything to where everything looks as even as possible as far as my gaps. Everything looks just the way I want it to. And then after I'm happy with that, I'll screw them right to those boards. After I screw them to those boards, I'll pull the temporary screws out of the side of the coffin. The lid comes right off, and it's all done. So let's go ahead and get that screwed on, and then we'll be on the home stretch. All right, so at this time, this project is complete. We have ourselves a nice working coffin right here for less than 20 bucks. It took about maybe 3 hours to make. This is something you could easily do in an afternoon. And for the most part right now, unless you want to go a couple steps further with it, you really don't need to do anything to it. Because like I said in the beginning of the video, since it's already weathered and looks like crap to begin with, you don't really have to paint it unless you want to. The other kind of cool thing about it is since it is the fencing and you have like the little slats right here, if say you weren't planning on opening it, you could stick some lights in there, put a fog machine inside, and you have all the fog and the lights kind of oozing out all the seams and stuff like that, which kind of give you a cool look. But if you wanted to go a couple steps further, there's a lot of different things you can do with these things. As far as you could have obviously you have the lid completely open. You can put hinges on there. You can motorize it. You can animate it. You could always break the lid right here, make it look like half the lid is missing, and you can see the top of the skeleton and stuff like that. So there's so much you could do with this thing after you get to this point. But for the initial build for less than 20 bucks, you can't go wrong with what you got right here. There is one thing that you might want to do on the inside. It's not a necessity, but it might be something recommended. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. All right, to show you what I'm referring to, on the inside right here, the original boards right here that originally held the fencing together, you can see they're so much thicker than like a regular 1x2, and they kind of close off the space a little bit. Now, depending on what you plan on using it for, that's probably not going to be a big deal. It's not affecting anything, or it's not really hurting anything. But what I ran into with mine specifically is I don't have the ability to move my skeleton down as far into the box as I want to, because this part of the bone on the femur right here is kind of sticking out a little bit, and it's causing it to stop. Now, I could always go the cheap way and just, cut that off right there and get my play. But if I ever want to use a skeleton for something else, now I done cut it. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these. Now removing these, you just got to be careful, because with all this wood being old, when you get your pry bar in here and as you're prying on it, sometimes you might split this piece right here. Now, I don't care if this breaks, but if this splits right here, then I got to replace that whole side. So I just got to take my time and pull them off slowly without doing any damage. Once I get them off, I'm probably going to do 2 pieces of 1x, maybe one right here, and that's going to give me that play that I need. And since I got it open, some of the other things you could do with one of these things to help, if you want to go that extra step, like I was talking about earlier, is you could always line this with fabric, especially if you take these bigger chunks off. You can line this with fabric. You can put some red velvet in here, some black, white, whatever you want to do, dress it all up. You can maybe put like a platform back underneath here, so it kind of sits up a little bit like this, or whatever the case may be. So there's so much more you can still do with this thing outside of the initial build. But overall, like I said, this is pretty much done. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I hope you guys got some good information from it, and thanks for watching.